Let me be honest with you. I don't like the word Christian. It's a word that's full of baggage and misunderstanding. It's not often a word that's shared by our society in a positive way. If you do a quick Google search on what people think about Christians or Christianity, you will discover a diverse response. If you drill down, two things will appear. One is negative and the other is positive. The negative response is towards Christians. Words like judgmental, closed-minded and dogmatic are commonplace. However, the positive response is towards Jesus. It seems most people who don't like Christianity or Christians like Jesus. Now that doesn't surprise me because in Jesus' time, the people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus and he liked them back. It seems today, generally speaking, that people like Jesus but are not too fond of his followers. And let's be honest, they've got good reason to be. As Christians, we don't always live our lives in a way that reflects the character of Jesus. The image that Christians often present to the world is not one that's in line with who Jesus is. Now that is an unfair statement because whilst it's true in some places, it isn't true in all. I see many people who would call themselves Christians going out of their way to patiently and compassionately offer love to the world and to the people around them. I see countless examples of people going above and beyond to be a force of good in the world. The problem is we don't always see it. And for whatever reason, we focus on the negative above the positive. There's a lot of misunderstanding of what it means to be a Christian. That's true for those of us who've been following Jesus for some time, and for those of us who wouldn't class ourselves as Christians or religious. And by the way, whilst I would definitely class myself as a Christian, I wouldn't class myself as religious. Perhaps that's another conversation for another time. I would say that being a Christian is something we are that impacts everything we do. Now, if that's true, it's crucial we understand what it is that we're claiming to be. If being a Christian is something that potentially impacts my entire life, I need to make sure I understand what it is I'm doing. The word Christian only appears 3 times in the Bible, and it's a title or a description given to the followers of Jesus by other people. We think that this term was actually first used as an insult. It meant little Jesus and was used to mock the first Christians. But the thing they were being mocked for was actually in line with who they were or who they were aiming to be. To be a Christian is to be Christ-like, to be like Jesus. We sometimes look at our kids and comment how similar they are to their parents. He's just a smaller version of you, is what we often say. Now, whilst my kids might be offended by being described as a smaller version of me, I would take it as the highest compliment to be described as like Jesus. Sadly, today, that's not what most people think of when they hear the word Christian. So the phrase I prefer to use is follower of Jesus. Now, I know that the words we use to describe Christians isn't really going to make a big difference in how the world perceives us, but it can go a long way to helping us understand what it means to be a Christian, encouraging and challenging us to live our lives accordingly. So in essence, a Christian is someone who follows Jesus. Unfortunately, this phrase too is losing its meaning. We follow people on social media, and to follow someone is taking on new meaning. Jesus invites us to follow him, but not in a social media way. Following Jesus isn't about showing some interest in what he's doing and looking at his photos every now and again. It's far deeper than that. Although, if you're honest with yourself, do you follow Jesus like you do other people on social media? Do you drop in every now and again, listening to what he has to say, even liking it, but then going about your own business, not allowing it to impact or shape who you are or what you do? There are 2 main words or phrases that the early church used to describe themselves. The first is the Greek word hagios. We translate this in our English Bibles as holy or saints. It's the same word used to describe the Holy Spirit. It's a word that's full of religious connotations for us today, but in its original context, it was used to describe someone who was set apart by God for his plans and purposes. Jesus is holy, his Spirit is holy, the scriptures are holy. They're all set apart by God with a purpose, to reveal the good news, the hope and joy found in God through Jesus. And now his followers are holy as they carry on Jesus' mission to the world. They're set apart to be part of what God is doing to bring restoration and healing into the world. The other phrase they used to describe themselves was followers or members of the way. I love this description. It implies movement, direction, and purpose. Jesus referred to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. To be followers of Jesus is to follow him as the way, to live as he would if he was in our shoes, to treat others as he would, to love as he would. To be followers of the way is to embrace the radical and revolutionary teaching of Jesus and allow it to penetrate deep within you so that it flows out through everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do. That is what it means to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus. That is what it means to be holy. There will never be a perfect word or phrase that easily captures what it really means to be a follower of Jesus. It's just too big a thing to define in a simple statement. Now, having said that, there is a word that's begun to resonate with me as I reflect on what it is that Jesus is calling me to, as he calls me to follow him. As I look through the pages of Scripture at the examples of the first disciples and the early church, this word keeps popping into my mind. It's a word that's given fresh vision and excitement for me as I seek to continue to follow Jesus. So what is it? Adventurer. Now, I'm not suggesting we stop calling ourselves Christians and start calling ourselves adventurers. That would be a bit odd. But I am suggesting that you start thinking of yourself as an adventurer. If you're someone who classes themselves as a Christian, some of you will love this word. Others of you will be scared or even daunted by it. You might imagine people like Bear Grylls or Ben Fogle or fictional characters like Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. By calling yourself an adventurer, I'm not saying you have to live in the wild, hunt for your food and drink your own wee like Bear Grylls does. Can you imagine going out for dinner with him? I'm also not saying that you have to be like a hobbit from the Lord of the Rings. Being short and having hairy feet isn't what I'm talking about here. The adventure Jesus calls us to is one where we don't always know where we're going or what will happen. It's one with twists and turns along the way. One where we see and experience things we never thought were possible. It's exciting, it's surprising, it's awe-inspiring, it's challenging, unexpected, it's difficult. It's an adventure that is life-giving and an adventure of a lifetime that lasts into eternity. So who's in? Who's up for being part of this adventure? Luke records the start of this adventure for Peter, James, and John. You can read it in chapter 5 of Luke's Gospel. And I really want to encourage you to do that. This week, why don't you take some time to read through the examples of the calling of the disciples in the 4 Gospels and ask yourself, what is it that Jesus is calling them to? Peter, who's actually called Simon, again, that's another story for another time. Peter was a fisherman like James and John. They'd been fishing all night on the Sea of Galilee and were finishing their shift when Jesus turns up. He was speaking to a large crowd and asked them to use their boat as a stage so the crowd could see him. They sat out a bit into the lake and Jesus continues to speak to the crowd. When he's finished speaking, he asked Peter to set out to deep water to do some more fishing. Now imagine you'd worked all night. You're about to finish work and someone asks you to do another shift. How do you respond? I'm amazed Peter hasn't pushed Jesus out of the boat. But it's not just that they'd finished work. It's also that they'd worked hard all night and didn't catch anything. Why would they try again? But they do. They set out for deep water, they let down their nets, and they pull in the biggest catch of their careers. It's so big that the boat is almost swamped, and they have to get another one to help. Peter, being quick off the mark, realizes that there's something different about Jesus. He sees that Jesus is special, but that he isn't. All of a sudden, the perfection of Jesus highlights his own imperfection. It's an uncomfortable place to be, and Peter wants to hide. Jesus says to him, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for men." Luke tells us that Peter, James, and John left their catch on the beach and followed Jesus. And as we continue to read through the Gospels, we see what it is that Jesus had called them to. Jesus wasn't inviting them to be part of a religious institution. He wasn't inviting them to take up a new hobby or an interest. He wasn't asking them to be religious. He was inviting them to come with him on an adventure that would transform their entire lives, an adventure that would shape their entire worldview, and one that would shape the entire world. And so for 3 years they followed Jesus. They listened to him. They heard him say things like, "I have come so that you may have life to the full, and I have come to seek and save the lost." They heard him say, "Love God and love each other through everything you do." And they saw him do it. Jesus didn't just spout empty words. He lived out what he said. They watched him perform miracles. They observed him challenge the religious leaders and their hypocrisy. They witnessed him healing people, even bringing people back from the dead. They saw the value and attention that Jesus gave to the people who'd been pushed to the margins of society, the way he loved the unlovable. They watched from a distance as Jesus was arrested for claiming to be the Messiah, the Son of God. They cowered in fear as they heard about his execution and his burial. They were thinking the adventure was over. But then, full of doubt, they emerged from their hiding place as they heard news that Jesus was back, proving he was who he says he was. The adventure wasn't over as they feared it was. It was just about to begin. Jesus handed them the keys to his kingdom. He entrusted the adventure, the mission to them. He instructed them to go into all the world to share the good news of Jesus through words and action. And so the adventure continued. The church was born and the world was changed. They took the radical words and the revolutionary actions of Jesus and lived them out. And 2,000 years on, the world is a different place because of this adventure that Jesus has called his followers to and his church to be part of. Education, healthcare, government, charity has been formed under the banner of Jesus. Not in a political or religious way, but in a life-giving, transformative way. The adventure Jesus invites us to isn't about clambering over rocks and building wild shelter. It's not about seeking the next adrenaline hit. It's about being his hands and his feet, about being his voice. It's about being part of a movement that seeks to demonstrate and declare the goodness of God through what we do and what we say. It's about making a positive difference in the world, in our world, about choosing to love when we don't feel like it, choosing to forgive when we don't want to, choosing to get involved and roll up our sleeves when we just feel like sitting back on the sofa. And thousands of years into the future, thousands of miles away from the place where it all began, Jesus comes to you as an individual and he invites you to be an adventurer, to be transformed, to be like him, to become like him, to follow him into your world, your workplace, your community, your friendship groups, your family, to share the radical words and the revolutionary actions of Jesus, to experience the fullness of life he has for you and help others to do the same. And thousands of years into the future, thousands of miles away from the place where it all began, Jesus comes to his church, inviting us to be adventurers with him, to be a community of people that seeks to bring life into our world, into our community. Jesus calls us on the adventure of helping people find and follow him, allowing this growing faith to be something that impacts all they are, all they think, all they say, and all they do. Jesus created his church to be a gathering of people who will carry on what he has started, gathering others to him. That's exactly what the word church means. It comes from the Greek word ecclesia, which means gathering or to gather. Now, this season has shown us that we can gather and be scattered at the same time. The church isn't a building or a geographical location. It's the collective noun given to a bunch of adventurers who've accepted Jesus' invitation to follow him on the expedition, on the mission he started. And so Jesus invites you. He invites us on this adventure. It's one that will take us to places we have never been before, to experience things we have never experienced before. As a community, as a church, he calls us to boldly go where no one has gone before, to be at the forefront of cultural revolution and change, to speak into our world, to bring life and hope, to be the good news that Jesus is to the world, to draw people to him as we're being drawn to him, to remove barriers and obstacles from their path of discovering who Jesus is and what it means for them to be part of the adventure too. That is the adventure that Jesus invites us on. And it's one that changes everything, one that ultimately impacts all we are and all we do. But it's one that starts with a simple step to follow. Just as Peter, James and John did all those years ago on that beach. Full of questions and uncertainties, they took the step to follow Jesus, not knowing where it would lead them. You know, whilst this adventure ultimately impacts all we are and all we do, it doesn't begin there. To follow Jesus on this adventure is a willingness to walk with him and grow with him. Over time, the impact that Jesus has on you and your world will grow. But let's start walking before we start climbing. So where are you at on this adventure? Do you follow Jesus like you follow others on social media? Or are you prepared to go on this life-changing adventure with him? To take that step to start following, or to restart following, perhaps for the first time, or to come again recognizing that your faith in Jesus has become just another thing you do. It's part of who you are, but it's not the thing that shapes all of who you are and all you do. To get to that point doesn't happen in an instant, but over a lifetime. But it starts with a step, and another, and another. Each day it begins with a step to choose to follow Jesus on the adventure he has for you. Jesus invites you to follow him on this adventure of a lifetime. What will you do? Are you in?